Nigel Farage, a British politician, former leader of the UK Independence Party, current member of the European Union Parliament from southeast England. UKIP.org is the UK Independence Party website. It's kind of like the Ron Paul version of the anti-New World Order crowd over in England. Great folks. And Nigel Farage, I noticed last week, excoriated Herman van Rompuy. We're going to play a clip of that coming up. The head of the EU, for back in December, holding hands and hugging on Muammar Gaddafi. And we've seen countless other European and American politicians over there saying he was our gallant little ally the last 6 years after former British Prime Minister at the time, Tony Blair, made deals with him. It's now in the London Telegraph, Associated Press, New York Times that, yes, the main contingent attacking Gaddafi from the east is al-Qaeda. But it's the good al-Qaeda, we're told. And if you're not for al-Qaeda now, you're anti-freedom. So just absolutely amazing. And to break this down from the European Union perspective, on the heels of Barack Obama's speech, the Washington Post hailing Obama for basically quietly initiating the rebels and giving them the green light. British SAS on the ground, we now learn, for over a month. It is confirmed 2,200 Marines preparing to ground invade. But it's not a war. It's kinetic military action. And if it's a ground invasion, it's part of a humanitarian assistance. So this is not a war, Nigel Farage, is it?
I'm afraid it could well be a war. You know, we've started something here. We've no idea where it's going to end. I mean, this idea that Gaddafi's a bad man. Look, Gaddafi's been a bad man for 42 years. But as you quite rightly say, 6 years ago, Mr. Blair went and hugged him, and Mr. Berlusconi's been to meet him as well. And our British Commissioner in Europe, Peter Mandelson, went pheasant shooting with his son. I mean, we welcomed this guy in to the fold. We treated him as a friend and an ally. And as recently as December, the President of the European Union was there, you know, holding hands and being all matey with him. And now we're being told, and Herman van Rompuy and the British government and the French government are saying, this is all about regime change. We've got to get rid of Gaddafi, and we are actively, militarily, supporting the rebels without having had a clue from the start who the rebels are or what their motivations are. Now, if this is for humanitarian reasons, who is to say that if the rebels get to Tripoli, that they won't massacre Gaddafi's people? I mean, I just think we've got into something here. We haven't thought it through. It's not part of a bigger North African and Middle East strategy, and I seriously regret our actions so far.
Well, it's confirmed that they lied and said through the British Foreign Ministry that he'd run to Venezuela to destabilize. It's confirmed that he didn't run to Zimbabwe. It's confirmed that that he was not strafing crowds of people, and they were actually armed groups. But we're not saying Gaddafi's a good guy. The point here is we've been told a lot of lies. And as you pointed out, mainline, even BBC, has admitted that the rebels in the East are just grabbing people and lining them up and shooting their political enemies. And so this whole line about, oh, we've got to do this for humanitarian reasons, what's the real reason? You're in the EU Parliament. I mean, is this about a political distraction from what's happening?
Well, you've got to remember that as far as the European Union's concerned, we are in very, very deep crisis over here. Already in the space of the last year, we've had to bail out Greece, whose presence in the euro wasn't working. We've had to bail out the Irish, and we are within days, I would suspect, of having to bail out Portugal, with the bigger worry that the Spanish economy, which is about 7 times the size of the Irish one, may need bailing out too. We're literally running out of money in the European Union to keep this crazy single currency project going. And I think it's been all through the years, you know, a marvellous thing for leaders when they're in real trouble and when public support is waning to head off and have foreign military adventures. And so I do see this as much as anything else as a diversionary tactic, as an attempt to whip up jingoistic support for our boys going into Libya and doing the right thing. And initially, they appeared to have got away with it. I suspect, as you say, because they were telling us a pack of lies. But now, I mean, so much so, when the British Parliament, when the House of Commons had a vote on this, only 13 MPs out of 650 voted against military action. Such was that sort of lemming-like support amongst our politicians for for this enterprise. But I suspect that now, today's report that there is a presence of Al-Qaeda amongst the rebels, the reports that actually, both sides have committed atrocities and they will probably get worse as time goes on. I think that politicians that have launched us into this, thinking it'll increase their popularity, if we're going to send in ground troops as well, who's to say we're not getting ourselves into yet another Afghanistan? And I think politically this decision will backfire very badly on them.
Well, I agree with you, but now we have Senator Lieberman and others saying this sets a precedent that any time people rebel in a country, whether it's a good country, bad, whatever, that now the UN will pass a resolution, and in less than 48 hours, the U.S. military was firing cruise missiles, NATO members were dropping bombs, England and France and others. I mean, this is incredible that our Congress... I mean, at least in England, you guys, had a vote on it. Our Congress, I know the UK Independence Party is always talking about how 70+% of the laws that govern England now, you don't even get to vote on in the British Parliament. No. Well, here, Obama didn't even consult Congress when the law says they've got to give a declaration of war or at least an authorization of force, and our own Congress barely even batted an eye at becoming vestigial or ceremonial.
Well, I mean, you are being very badly let down, aren't you, by your congressmen? I mean, they should be standing up and screaming and shouting. Their job is to represent people. Their job is to represent the democratic will. Their job is to have a check and a balance on the executive. And they're clearly, in America right at the moment, totally failing in their duty. And, this idea that we've got to support rebellions wherever they may be. I mean, is anybody seriously suggesting that if there's a major uprising in Saudi Arabia and the Saudis shoot a couple of hundred, that we're going to start bombing Saudi Arabia? I mean, are we about to launch our own version of jihad against every regime, every Arab state? I mean, it's absolutely insane, and I cannot for the life of me. I mean, we've been in Afghanistan for over 10 years. There is no end in sight whatsoever. I cannot believe that public opinion will put up in Britain, America or France with us getting involved in a whole series of military conflicts across the Middle East. I think the whole thing is absolutely crazy.
Well, you're pointing out how just wild and out of control this is, this new military adventurism, but it's being hailed all over the European papers, U.S. papers, British papers, as the New World Order, that this is the new cover for, I guess, globalist imperialism, is that they quietly finance rebellions, they use Al-Qaeda, they tell us Al-Qaeda's now good, right out of 1984, and now they're saying, yes, rise up against your government and we'll do a no-fly zone. They're openly debating in our news, all over the news channels, how we need to go ahead and attack Syria. I mean, this is starting to look like the makings of bigger than a regional war. This looks like how World War I or World War II started.
Well, it's odd, isn't it? You never quite know what will catalyse a bigger conflict. What I do know is that, when World War I started and World War II started, the massive populations in the countries supported the basic aims of the war, all right? Now, the point about this is, whatever the media are saying, whatever the mainstream media are saying, whatever our politicians in Westminster are voting for, however much your congressmen bury their own heads in the sand, there was an opinion poll out in Britain this morning that showed 7 out of 10 Britons are very worried about the Libyan adventure and deeply concerned that we shouldn't get ourselves further embroiled. So I just don't believe there's public support for this. And, there comes a break point with this, doesn't there? I mean, governments can get away with a hell of a lot. They can lie to us, they can rob us, they can do all sorts of things. But in the end, they have to have consent of some kind. Otherwise, what we're going to see are rebellions of our own in our own countries, and people will take to the streets and say, we do not wish to get embroiled in regional or possibly even global conflict.
Well, that's my next point. Member of European Union Parliament, Nigel Farage, former leader of the UK Independence Party in England. Look, we have 30 million illegal aliens in this country. The Marxist Ford Foundation universities do teach the Southwest bought from Mexico. From Texas to California is owned by Mexico. There are open calls for rebellion. I know there's giant immigrant populations in Europe that routinely burn large areas to the ground. What would happen under this new UN precedent if they rose up and began burning cities? Would we then see the Russians or the Chinese under the UN who are members come here into a no-fly zone and attack us? Now, obviously that's absurd, but that's the precedent that's being set here.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think that, we have some very large Muslim populations in European countries. Mercifully, the vast majority of them are absolutely peaceful and democratic, but we have got some very dangerous minorities. My feeling is that by going to war in the Middle East, all we are likely to do is to give the extremists an excuse. And so you could see two types of demonstration going on in these countries. Firstly, you could see, as you say, Muslim extremists, getting back, and we shouldn't forget that the last time we bombed the Colonel back in the mid-80s, it wasn't very long before a 747 landed on the village of Lockerbie.
Tell you what, stay there. Final segment, Nigel Farage back in just a few minutes. That's the next point I want to cover. The media is saying, oh, Gaddafi may attack us. Then they'll use that to take more of our... member of the EU Parliament, Nigel Farage. By the way, the Liberty Movement, I was just talking to him during the break, is exploding all over Europe, and not just England. Their party is expanding. Back on May 6th of last year, a horrible, devastating plane crash. The pilot barely survived. Nigel was torn up really bad, but he's back. I tell you, talk about stiff upper lip. Nigel, finishing up with the terror card. They've said, yes, we're bombarding Gaddafi and blowing up infrastructure, and if he fights back in any way, it's terrorism. And they're talking about that legitimizing a ground invasion if there's any type of terror attack. I wonder if some groups might allow crazies to do something or might open the door. Who knows?
Well, they do seem to be very keen to put in ground troops, don't they?
Yes.
We've already had the SAS there for some time. That we know for a fact. We've got the British Royal Marines getting ready to go. You've got a Corps getting ready to go. It's almost as if our governments are looking for an excuse to put in ground troops. And I think, I really feel that we have got to put pressure on our politicians, real pressure on our politicians. And I think if there's any prospect of some major escalation of us getting involved in a huge conflict across the Middle East, we got to take to the streets. We got to take to the streets, millions of us, and we've got to march, and we've got to say, not in my name. We do not give consent for endless war and endless conflict, especially because whether it's Al-Qaeda and the rebels or Gaddafi, they may both be as bad as each other, and clearly it's not in our national interest to get involved in these conflicts.
Well, we're now hearing from Obama and others that this is a great moment for globalism, for the New World Order, where the UN gives the orders and our militaries go in. Is this not more of this expansion of undemocratic power, similar to how the EU runs England?
Yes, it is a classic case of what we call the beneficial crisis. Whenever there's a crisis, it's used by big government, it's used by supranational global government as an excuse to say, look, we're doing the right thing, and to take more powers and to further rob us of our democracy. This, perhaps what is happening now, looks like the most extreme example of it that we've had to date, and we've got to resist. As I said earlier, we've got to take to the streets. We've got to withdraw our democratic consent from politicians who are not prepared to stand up and fight this.
Well, notice a few weeks ago, Obama didn't even want to give a speech or comment on Libya, and they reported that he had to give this speech last night, and it was, quote, a hard sell because people aren't for it. Then I saw a Reuters poll claiming that 60+% supported it, but then I read the poll. It just asked, what option you thought they should use in war. It didn't even let people have a decision to say no.
Yeah, well, as I say, overnight in Britain, there's a poll out been conducted by one of our TV channels showing that 7 out of 10 people in Britain are deeply worried and want no further escalation. And I would reckon that's a pretty accurate opinion poll amongst ordinary people. Sadly, amongst our so-called mainstream media and politicians, that message hasn't yet got through. It's got to.
Now, Nigel, I want to put on screen for PrisonPlanet.tv viewers, for radio listeners, they can just search the term Herman von Rompuy, Muammar Gaddafi, and they'll see the photos of the hugging and the shaking hands and the rest of it. But politicians in England and other countries that were cozy to Hitler early on, they were excoriated and removed or just resigned. But we're not seeing resignations by Labour Party that's been lavishing Gaddafi in England. We're not seeing any of these EU pimps like Sarkozy or Rumpi stepping down. In fact, they're grandstanding and quite proud of the fact that just months ago they were lip-locked with him. I mean, are you calling for them to resign?
I am, of course I am. I mean, I think their hypocrisy beggars belief. But, you know, sometimes these things take a bit longer. I mean, your comment about Hitler is, of course, right. I mean, virtually the entire upper class of Britain were taken in by Herr Hitler, thought he was absolutely wonderful. The BBC thought he was terrific. Our king even went to visit him. Our parliament thought he was wonderful. And Churchill, Winston Churchill, and about 20 backbench members of parliament were derided as being insane, eccentric, warmongers. In the end, they were right. And in the end, the bad guys lost their jobs. And I think the same is going to happen again. It just may take a little bit longer than we'd like.
Well, the comparison is certainly there. I mean, if they're going to say Gaddafi's this devil, but then be prancing around with him just months ago, they need to resign. I mean, this is outrageous.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is sickening hypocrisy in every way. At the moment, they are being allowed to get away with it. And I look at our mainstream news channels across here, and nobody is asking the right questions. It's all being presented on our TV screens as if we're doing some wonderful social good. The rebels are the good guys, Gaddafi's the bad guy. As we've learned today, it isn't as simple as that. And again, you know, to get change, we've got to be prepared to stand up and shout.
Absolutely. UKIP.org. Nigel Farage, member of European Parliament. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We'll be back.